Is the last game really a surprise, chat? So here's the thing. I've been playing Last of Us 2 in secret. Because I did not want to play the game on stream. And I've been holding back. I'm just kidding. We all know what you're gonna pick for Game of the Year 2020. And once again, there's a kind of a weird similarity. There's kind of a weird similarity here between my most disappointing games of this year and my favorite game of the year. And that's the fact that I think several of the games that I have felt are like game of the year qualifications, I think it might actually be better games than this one. I do. I think even Ghost of Tsushima and Hades, and maybe not Doom Eternal, maybe Ori 2. I think 3 of the other games that are on my personal game of the year list are actually better than Final Fantasy VII Remake. The problem is that Final Fantasy VII Remake, and I think with perspective, it hits even more, because I've spent the last few days going back and watching elements of my playthrough from FF7 Remake and watching the reactions of other people to this game and how it's like affected some. I don't think it's as good a game as some others. However, I have to take into account that my critical feelings of certain titles will be greatly diminished by my personal ones. What personally does shit for me is going to have more of an impact on how I feel about a game than what I mechanically feel about some games being more refined or more polished or stuff like that. It's very specifically my list. In the event, I was working for another company, and I was like, you know what? I'd probably give it to Hades. I'd give it Game of the Year. Or I would give it to Ghost of Tsushima, because I think some of the other elements of that are more polished. However, Final Fantasy VII Remake hits for me on so many personal levels that I have to give it Game of the Year. And there's also another very good reason that's become extremely relevant over the past few weeks. And I made this observation early, when the game was coming out. Cyberpunk came out and was sort of received the way it was, and right, I don't think I need to talk about Cyberpunk, and I don't even want to get into that part of the conversation. What I want to talk about is the effect of it. There was a couple of games that came out this year that were ridiculously sought after and long-running games that people have known about for 5 to 7 years that a lot of people have been waiting for. Much less FF7 Remake was announced 5 years before its release, but people have been waiting for this since like the PS3 came out. So we got a couple of long-running giant games that were about to drop and either satiate fans or really piss them off. And to think that Cyberpunk was about to release within a week of Final Fantasy VII Remake's delayed launch date. This game was going to come out first, and then a few days later, Cyberpunk was going to launch alongside Final Fantasy VII Remake, and in my opinion, essentially take away any thunder, right? It was like, damn, I love FF7, right? And FF7 Remake's a great game, but Jesus, dude, if Cyberpunk comes out, no one's going to give a shit about FF7, and that's going to kind of suck, right? That's going to be, I would like FF7 to at least get a little bit of time to shine, where especially with me having, everyone's going to want me to go play Cyberpunk. Anyway, all I'm saying is imagine a situation where a lot of people felt the way they did about FF7 Remake at the end of it, because it clearly goes in directions that people were not assuming. This game takes some liberties and goes in places that are kind of shocking and kind of scary to Final Fantasy VII fans in many ways. But I would just say the reason this ends up being Game of the Year for me in many ways, put yourself in a situation where Cyberpunk came out at the same time and released alongside Final Fantasy VII. It makes the issues of FF7 Remake seem so minor by comparison that I think that's what makes it fucking impressive. This game was impossible for it to actually be good. There was no way that after so many years of anticipation, after so many years of delay, of not mentioning it, of trying to stay away from this project, of doing whatever they could to not make this game, they avoided it because they knew they would never be able to match the level of quality, the nostalgia. They would never be able to reach the pinnacle of what games were when Final Fantasy VII came out, where everything was this genre-defining Metal Gear Solid FF7 kind of experience, you know? I have to give FF7 Remake credit. The game isn't bad. It's actually quite good. The combat is shockingly similar to the previous game, but you get to control more of it. The materia system is the same thing as the previous game, but you can just do more with it. It's like they specifically targeted all the things that people like around the original Final Fantasy VII and were like, yo, we aren't going to change the things we do with how you play the game. We're going to let you do all the things you could from the previous one, but now we're going to take a 2020 spin on it, right? A modern gameplay spin. Granted, right? Granted, the thing that I wish they took a spin on I truly wish that they were like, hey, let's update this in the same way that our characters and storytelling and visuals and combat is being upgraded, is the level design. The level design is some PS2 shit. Like, and are agreeable. I don't think anyone that either dislikes this game or loves Final Fantasy VII Remake can argue that this game has some fucking PlayStation 2 level of level design. It does, man. It's just, it's not good. But what's funny is that that's actually echoing every other first-party Square Enix game. Like, Square Enix is a company where they tried so hard in almost every single other way but level design, where almost all of their other games, all the other Final Fantasies, all the Kingdom Hearts, like going all the way back to like Final Fantasy X even, you really think about it, their level design is just not good. It really hasn't changed much since the PlayStation 2 era in many ways. I don't think that's like... and the thing is, even with that being the way it is, it's not bad, right? All the other elements are so exemplary when it comes to the design of Final Fantasy VII Remake, with its characters, with its fucking music, with its combat, and even in general with its overall world building is great. It's super good. I always felt that we could use a Midgar experience for FF7, but I think what they did with Midgar is really, really special, and making it feel truly lived in and alive outside of technical limitations, which are revealed not to be just fucking lazy. They are clearly technical limitations because of the damn Unreal Engine. For everything else to be as good as it is, and then come together where the level design doesn't end up being the big focal point anymore. To me, Final Fantasy VII Remake, not in terms of like character and story, but just in terms of how the game is, it's essentially Final Fantasy 13, but done well. Where you're not focused on the fact that you're just running down this friggin' corridor, right? That the majority of the game is just run down corridor and you do thing and then you end corridor. This game really isn't that much different from that. It isn't. It's just that all the other elements are done so well. They're done so incredibly fucking well that, once again, the corridor thing is not as focused as it is, right? It ends up not being a huge detriment. You do hope that you could, you know, obviously search more and do things, right? But the core elements of the characters and the story and the combat and the music and everything marrying itself makes it so goddamn good. So good. Even though it's clearly a game that I have gripes with, right? It clearly has pacing issues towards the end. It clearly doesn't have the best level design, but has some of the best visuals during some gameplay moments that Square has ever produced on a fucking base PS4. You gotta realize how much of a technical marvel this game is in some ways. Base PS4, This game looks amazing. I would like you to also realize other games have come out this year on the base PS4 and have not looked great. I think perspective for me has done a lot for Final Fantasy VII Remake and make me realize how great it fucking was. When other stuff has happened this year that essentially brings you down to this point where it's like, shit, yeah, damn, man. That was a big anticipated thing, and then it came out and it was not what people were expecting. I think this game wasn't what people were expecting in general, just because of how much different it is. And spoilers, right? I am actively saying this is a spoiler about the entire experience of Final Fantasy VII Remake. And the thing that once again puts it above and why it's my game of 2020, Final Fantasy VII Remake is not technically a remake. It's a sequel. It's a sequel to Final Fantasy VII. They kept that shit hidden right in front of our faces for the past 5 years. That this game is a continuation of Final Fantasy VII. It's a sequel disguised as a remake. It's nuts. And what that does at the end of the game, which leaves its audience with a lot of worry, with a lot of hope, with a lot of questions, with a lot of like resentment of what the fuck is happening? Like, wait, what the hell is happening? It's such an insane direction that it's hard to imagine they would take a step like that with something so beloved. And it's clear that it didn't hit for everyone the same levels it hit for me. But for me, I am now re-experiencing Final Fantasy VII in its, audience remake form, while the characters in the game are technically re-experiencing this because it is a continuation of the game. The fact that you can go back and play through FF7 Remake again on a second playthrough and make observations that change everything about why characters are doing what they're doing. Wait, does this character know about what's going to happen? Wait a minute, why are we doing this, but that's different than before? This was a remake. The game's aware that it's a fucking remake. The meta commentary, I think I love it so much that I couldn't stop thinking about this game for like 2 months. I loved just going to threads and forums and reading on people's theories and opinions and discoveries throughout the game that make a new observation. To me, it did the same exact thing that Bloodborne kind of did when I beat that game. And you're able to go back and discover so much crazy shit that you didn't even see before. Exactly, and this is how I describe it. They are Back to the Future 2ing Final Fantasy VII. And that leaves us with a questionable place going forward, right? A very questionable, oh Jesus, where are they going to take this? And people are now worried about it because the end of this game is pretty nutty. End of the game gets pretty crazy and pretty nutty. However, what it does leave is questions. We don't know exactly what's going to happen going forward. There's analysis of where our characters are going to go and how much the game will be similar to the previous Final Fantasy VII. And I don't think I could have asked for more. I don't. I think this has been their plan the whole time. Even when they were saying that Final Fantasy VII Remake was a part of the original compilation of Final Fantasy VII back in the mid-2000s, it's now painfully clear, once you beat this game, that is definitely fucking true. The story beats and elements are meant to associate and continue from all the weird compilation stuff. But I'm happy to announce that all the insane cringe that by in part associates its stuff with the compilation of Final Fantasy VII, which I don't like a lot of those elements very much either, is not present in this game. The best thing they did was not feel like this is made in the same timeline and by the same people that made Advent Children, Crisis Core, and or Dirge of Cerberus. It doesn't feel that way. Thank God, man. Thank God. If this game felt like any of those games or movies did, it would not have hit on the levels. They specifically were going for nostalgia, but they're going for nostalgia in a way that I don't think any remake has done before. Which is why Final Fantasy VII Remake hits on so many levels for so many people that was pretty profound. I have never played a game that has made me have happier moments than this. Like, I've never, right? I've played Resident Evil 2 Remake, I've played RE1 Remake, I've played a lot of these other beloved remakes, right? That sort of take your original experience and are just fantastic reinterpretations of what you love. I have never had feelings of happiness on the same level as playing through this game. Because of specifically, they know that people are going to be feeling that way playing through this shit. They know that this stuff is all deeply rooted into general society, like gamer society and stuff like that. Anyone that grew up in the 90s is going to have these moments. And they are going to specifically go after these moments one by one. And instead of being afraid of them, instead of trying to stay away because they're not going to be able to satiate those people. It's just going to be impossible to make people feel the way they did 20 years ago, 23 years ago. We can't do that. They did it. They actually did it. They made you feel the same way you felt about Final Fantasy VII as I felt 20 years ago. In a new, completely new way that I was not expecting. So I think FF7 Remake is easily my game of the year. Even though I think other games on my personal top 5 list are actually better games in design, I can't shake the fact that so much of this game just hits different in so many ways. That they were trying to grab an audience in the same way that Final Fantasy VII grabbed me back in 1997, where I didn't like RPGs, and I was essentially uninterested by them in many ways. They were trying to do that with FF7 Remake in 2020, man. They were trying to grab people that weren't normally into RPGs. Let's see if we can get them interested in Final Fantasy VII. And that was the impression I generally got watching people that never have played a Final Fantasy, and everyone's playing FF7 Remake because everyone's talking about it. They're like, shit, this game's cool, man. This game's crazy. This game's fucking cool, man. That's what FF7 did for me like 23 years ago. I haven't even mentioned the music, right? Do I even need to mention the music? Do I even need to mention the fact that this game does with its music the same thing that Killer Instinct does with its music? The same thing about how the music is meant to complement gameplay in every single fashion. How the music generally ramps up, takes the elements of what is nostalgic about Final Fantasy VII, keeps those, but also makes it feel like it's brand fucking new, and then does completely brand new things on top of that. The music's incredible. There's very few tracks in this game that are actually bad, that are actually even okay. Most of the music is on a level that is so ridiculously high quality that you don't even realize what you're listening to, you're just feeling it because it's happening during gameplay. It's incredible. To think that Final Fantasy VII has some of the greatest music that a lot of people remember because it had such a brooding, haunting score from when it came out, for them to capture that and modernize it and let so many composers just go absolutely apeshit with so much of it, and there's so much of it. There's so much fucking music, man. It's incredible. The Hell House. Like, Final Fantasy VII Remake ended up not hitting in some ways that I thought it would, and in ways that I was really worried about, right? I was worried about the characters. I was worried about the combat getting boring. I was worried about a lot of the development events being too similar to compilation of Final Fantasy VII type stuff. In all the moments that I was truly genuinely worried that they're just gonna fuck this up, the characters will never be what I remember them being from the PlayStation version. They're instead gonna be these weird mopey versions of themselves in the mid-2000s, where the characters don't feel like they're from Final Fantasy VII. They made every character better than they were in the original game. I don't know how they did it. Specifically, even targeting things that were in the original game on a translation level, right? On just a localization level, doing whatever they could to make the game feel as much like it was the original game. What Final Fantasy VII Remake does, and this is a thing that I'm going to continually say about almost every single game, because you can tell in the games when it happens. This game was made by a lot of people that really cared. It was made by a development staff that was so deep into development that they decided to cancel that shit 2 years in and be like, you know what? This isn't really hitting on the levels that we need it to. We're going to do it all ourselves. Fuck it. And as much of a nightmare situation that seemed like it was going to be back in like 2016, when we learned about that man, FF7 lost its developer and now they're taking everything in-house. This game's going to be a fucking, there's no way this shit's going to be good. Like, there was a very much looming reason and purpose that there's no way this game's going to be that good. It was pretty fucking good. It was actually ridiculously good in all the ways that we were worried it was going to be very bad. Now, if the sequels can possibly get some better level design, if the sequels and in tandem all the other first-party Square Enix games can get some better level design, that would be great, right? If we could get some level design that's just a little bit more modern and a little bit less PS2-like in many ways, I think Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2, having some open world elements as well, even being wide linear in many ways, might be very fun. I said the word. I think there's a lot to look forward to. There was a deep worry that I had that maybe FF7 Remake Part 1 isn't that good when it comes out. Maybe it's really not that good. Maybe that means that they'll learn from their mistakes and Final Fantasy VII Remake Part 2 can fix those issues so that when the game gets into its world, which is where FF7 actually gets the most interesting, it won't be as shitty. Maybe that'll happen. I'm lucky to say that Part 1 was pretty fucking good. Still pretty fucking good. Obviously not perfect. And if Part 2 can fix the things in this game that clearly needed work, then goddamn, Part 2 could be amazing. Holy crap! Part 2 could be fucking amazing! FF7 Remake is my #1 game of the year. Easily. I've never had a game make me feel the way I feel playing this. I've never had a game hit me with an element of nostalgia, but also complete bewilderment at how modern it is in many ways. Complete bewilderment that this is a fucking video game and I'm playing it. Like, this shit should not exist. It's impossible. It's impossible for it to be any good, but it's good. And the characters are great, and the music's incredible. There was no chance of this game making Final Fantasy VII fans happy, and they did it. I'm just gonna let your minds fill in the gaps here. There have been 2 other extremely high-profile games that have come out this year that have an extremely hardcore, dedicated fandom that loves the previous things they've done and have been looking forward to the continuation of where they're going to take things forward and how they're going to evolve it to some very interesting results. The fact that FF7 didn't astoundingly disappoint in the ways that maybe some other games might have for some of their audience, to me, puts a little bit of perspective on the situation. Yeah, I love this game. I have been specifically not watching people playing it, and I've been specifically not playing it since the hard mode playthrough. And that's because I am waiting for the damn PC release of this game to come out, and I am waiting for my eventual PC playthrough to be as fresh as possible. I want this shit to have been like a year in the back of my mind, to have forgotten a lot of things that have happened in this game, to sort of be reintroduced to them again when it comes out on PC and they're able to clearly tackle some of the technical issues the game had. And I'm playing this bitch at like 4K 140 hertz or some shit like that. I want it, man.